Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to today's session of Humanity Rising, day 152. Humanity Rising and over 350 partners from around the world have come together through this extraordinary pandemic we're undergoing to create a daily open space so that people from around the world can come together to share their experiences, their solutions, their hopes, their fears, their visions, and their strategies for how we can ensure a more holistic and resilient and regenerative and healthy world. Over the months now, we have covered pandemic-related events as they've unfolded. There was another milestone in the United States today that's just worth noting, as that country, having embraced the doctrine of herd immunity, that was also embraced in Sweden and the United Kingdom equally disastrously. It was reported today that there were 3,157 deaths from COVID in the last 24 hours. That exceeds the number of people who were killed on 9/11. The number of people that were killed on 9/11 was 2,977. So just take in for a moment that every 24 hours, the United States and areas all over the world will replicate it to a lesser percentage. But in the United States, we're going to be now experiencing a 9/11 level lethality rate every 24 hours. And that rate is expected to go up. So we're being challenged, everyone, by this pandemic in increasingly serious ways. And we expect that in the new year, there will be vaccinations, but there's increasing data that's emerging that the vaccines were developed too quickly without proper study. So there are issues that pertain to the solution that may not turn out to be the silver bullet. And that's really challenging all of us, particularly as we go into the holidays, to think very, very deeply about what on earth is happening on planet Earth right now. And that is the way into our theme today. And that is that humanity is being forced through the pandemic to take seriously what, for all practical purposes, is the invisible realm, the energetic realm. Because a little virus that is really too small to even begin to see by the naked eye can only be discerned under a microscope, has quite literally brought the human race to a standstill. And all the king's men and all the king's horses may not be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, in part because we're looking from the outside in, within the framework of materialism, causality, random determinism, when instead we need to be looking from the inside out. and understanding today what we used to know in antiquity. That not only are we interconnected with all that is, the visible and the invisible, the outer and the inner, but that this interconnected web speaks to us, communicates to us. All we have to do is listen with an understanding ear. So that's what we're going to delve into today. The realm of the energetic. Before we start our program, however, I would like to just invite all of us to take just a minute and take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes and place your attention on your heart. And for the next 60 seconds or so, try to listen to the sound of your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude. And if you can, through your heart, can you enter the energetic realm and hear the heartbeat of others? Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart, I want to frame our session today. We have three of the staff of Ubiquity University. Dr. Peter Merry, who's our Chief Innovation Officer, and Mr. Jim Hickman, who's a professor of neuroscience, teaches an annual course on the neurosciences, and Kaylin Rain, who's our director of energetics, who've come together to talk about something that might strike many of you as either new or strange, but which was universally embraced by civilizations east and west and north and south from the earliest dawn of human spirituality. One thinks of the shamans in ancient Mongolia or the Amazonia or in India or in China. What a shaman was a person who understood the language of nature and the language of society and could communicate back and forth. The shaman could see a flock of birds flying overhead at a crucial moment in the history of the tribe and interpret through the energetic frequencies of the birds exactly what the tribe should do. They were called the auguries, the omens, emperors, priests, city officials throughout antiquity would try to discern the energetic quality of the larger eco field. And then with the rise of science and modernity and industrialization, we thought we had outgrown these practices, which were relegated to the realm of superstition. And now today, in the 21st century, as the arrogance of our science and our technology is destroying the world around us, we've been felled by the invisible. And humanity's been presented with a stark challenge. How do we understand ourselves and nature and the world afresh? So what we're going to hear today is actually the most ancient understanding that human beings have had from the beginning, but which we forgot. And one of the beautiful things about Ubiquity University is that we embrace this realm. And Peter and Kaylin in particular have been monitoring and refining the energetic qualities of the university from the very beginning and have helped guide the university. So I just want everyone to know that what we're going to be talking about today is not just academic for us. It's something that we live by. And Jim, for years now, has been teaching neuroscience and our capacity to know the invisible realms more astutely. So let's dive right in. Thank you all for joining, everyone. And Peter, let's start with you. I know you've just gotten a new book out called Leading from the Field. You did your PhD dissertation on these matters with distinction and brilliance. So talk to us in the first instance, just how do you understand what the word energetics means? How do you understand it? How do we access it?
Thanks, Jim. And great to be back and great to be exploring this topic so kind of openly, as it were. I think this is part of what we have to do now, is start to make what has often been a bit mystical or weird the norm. Because, and when I'm going to say weird now, and I think of WYRD, which was actually the Anglo-Saxon term for the invisible realms. So making the weird the norm is really, I think, part of what we have to do. And the way I make sense of it and often explain it is, if we think of like the light spectrum, right? We accept that there's, it's a kind of bell curve, and we accept that there's a little band at the middle of the light spectrum that we can see. But we also know and accept that there's a lot of the spectrum of light that is there, but that we can't see with our normal senses. Well, for me, it's the same with energy and information, that everything is one spectrum of energy and information. And by the way, I use the term energy to mean information that is moving. So information that is dynamic, that's being carried by waves, energy waves. So the information is carried on the energy waves. That it's one spectrum of information, and that the bit that we can see at the middle, like at the light spectrum at the middle, is the bit that where the energetic waves have come into a certain level of coherence, locked into what we call standing waves. so that you can actually see the stuff around us. And in that dimension, the Newtonian laws apply. But when you get outside the visible spectrum, then we're in a world of information and energy that is coming into form, so literally in formation. And in that dimension, the laws of quantum physics apply. So it's one spectrum, but the different laws apply in different dimensions. So when we talk about energetics, we're really talking about that dimension outside of the visible that we can see, of information flowing as energy. And the key difference is that in the part of the spectrum that we can see, the material world, let's say, then that's where our rational mind, we can access and work well with our rational analytical mind there, because it's all about discerning differences and distinctions. But to be able to access the information and energetic realm, which is all flowing in a form of interconnectedness, we can't access that with our rational mind. So we have to learn to still the rational analytical mind and go inside, connect to our intuition, which is much more through the heart than through the mind. And that's how we can start to feel and connect to the information and energetic realms. So really, that's what I would, that's how I would describe that dimension. And the book, as you mentioned, Leading from the Field, is really a set of 12 principles for people who are accountable for any system with a name and a boundary, that help you to keep that energetic field coherent, so that as the information comes into form, it does so in a coherent way. And that can be whether you're in a family, your household, community, group, organization, whatever, anything with a name and a boundary essentially has that spectrum of information. And if we can learn to expand our bandwidth of perception outside of just the material, then we'll be able to engage with a bigger spectrum of life, and therefore be able to co-create more in the life process.
Peter, just give an example. I know you work with Hans Andeveg around ecosystems, whether it's organization or out there in the forest and on the land. Give us an example or two of how this works in real life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the practice of eco-intention, which is the kind of energetics practice that I'm most steeped in, as well as Perilandra, which is a kind of another practice, I would say, is designed to work with that energetic aspect of any system. Been going for about 30 years. They started working with areas of nature, particularly in Eastern Europe at that time, did some work with Gorbachev on a big park on the west side of Russia. And they had all the scientific institutes come out and measure the areas of land that they were balancing energetically, and then a pilot plot next to it. And they found that the vitality of the forests in the areas that they'd been balancing energetically increased compared to the pilot plot next to it. And they did this in multiple different locations, large estates in Scotland and the UK. And then after they'd worked primarily in natural environments, they started attracting some organizational development people. And they found out that, this actually works in organizations as well, which of course is no surprise if we think about it now. But it went from the kind of natural environments into farmers who found out that when they were working with the energetic architecture of their farms, it increased the vitality of the animals, the crops, they could reduce their pesticides, all of those kind of things. And in organizations, it increases the productivity, it reduces stress, it increases synchronicity. So at every single project that they do, they research in terms of either the biological impact or the cultural impact or performance impact in organizations and things. And I could go into more detail later on in the kind of details of how it works if we want, but that would take a few minutes. So maybe just to pause there and say, but it is an established practice. People do a vocational training registered with the Dutch government over here for 4 years to actually learn this practice. It's very rigorous because obviously you don't want to be messing with those dimensions either. So you need to learn to be able to manage your own energy, the energy of your own house and your own space, before you start working with other people's organizations and systems too.
Kaylin, is there something you'd like to add to this? Because this is such a vast and rich domain of working with the energetics of an ecosystem.
Okay. To begin with, in 1993, when I was at Naropa, I wrote a paper on reality from a Buddhist quantum perspective. And then my dissertation at Wisdom University was on quantum non-locality and systematic morphogenesis. So I've been working with the energetics since I started dowsing as a child when I was 5, and it's like 67 years later. And I've been a Buddhist since 1966, some kind of Buddhist training. So I would open with a little opening thing I have here. Everything is in a perpetual state of vibration, so it's difficult to see anything because all of it is constantly in motion. The Buddhist theory reminds us that all of that which we perceive as reality are actually transient virtual states that are momentary links between illusions of the past and illusions of the future, unfolding in the illusion of time. Take, for example, a koan from Zen Buddhism. You cannot solve the koan through a linear sequential thought. You need to reach for a different level of consciousness, which I see as the invisible realm. When I trained with Robert Lawler, who is the author of Voices of the First Day and the Geometry of the End of Time, he believes that the link between the seen and unseen, the manifest and the unmanifest, the real and the unreal, is a space or a moment in time that requires the introduction of an irrational number, which is a quantifiable key of sorts, which is why we focus a lot on the dowsing and putting a number on everything. That space is what some would refer to as an invisible realm, and the irrational number can unlock the door, but the person with the key, which is all of us, needs to be open to the possibility that the key will indeed work. Consciousness is intentionally and ordered information. And Diane Rothenberg once said that anthropologists know that there is no such thing as an impartial observer, which gets into Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and everything. But we are responsible for what we see, if you want to use the term as seeing. And part of that is coming from an invisible realm, because until we see it, it's in another space. And in the Dhammapada, the Buddha said existence is illusion, understand and go beyond, and this is the way of clarity. So in all the work that we do in sacred landscapes and organizational architecture with companies and everything, you want to try to make everything quantifiable in some sense, because that actually makes it real, because numbers are numbers. And at some point, Peter could tell the story of what we did in Yorkshire based on Peter's Google Earth application, and how we actually brought the unmanifest into the manifest on a hillside in the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire.
Peter?
You want to go there now? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating working with Kaylin. You know, I'm not a kind of expert in terms of all the different traditions and different tools and interventions to use in a kind of one-off way like that. But essentially what I've got is and anybody can find this on my blog actually at petermerry.org. I'll put the link in the chat later. It's a Google map overlay of all the different energy lines and grids on the planet. And it's amazing when you kind of tick it all and open it up, you could see the complete light body of the planet. And you can see places where a certain number of these energy lines cross. And Kaylin and I were working with Broughton Hall Estate, which you might remember from the Centers of Light talk earlier this year. And there was a point just to the north of the estate where a lot of these lines crossed. And so, being who we are, we said, let's go and find out what's there. So we kind of trudged over the moors, and there's nothing really signaling it, except when we got there, the hillside kind of went down like that, and then it plateaued out, and then it dropped down again, which was quite unusual for that place. And then we noticed a kind of very low wall around the space, and that was the point where the energy lines crossed. And we got there, we had no mobile reception. We were, there's no mobile reception here at all, so we can't kind of upload any photos. Or anyway, we did Kalen did his thing, set up his altar, boom, activated. Oh, what I also noticed was there was energy coming off the Earth. That's the kind of Earth energy, but there was no energy coming in from the cosmos. Normally you get cosmic energy coming in and you get Earth energy coming off, but there was no cosmic energy coming in. So anyway, Kalen set up his thing, his cards and various objects and things, and then, which he does very intuitively on the spot as far as I can see, and then hit his singing bowl, which activated it. And if you're sensitive in any way, you immediately feel something, and boom, then suddenly the cosmic energy was coming in. And what we couldn't believe is suddenly our phones were online, and we got a message from one of the stewards at Broughton, came in right at that moment, ping. So it's like the kind of estate had come online energetically, just as Kalen kind of hit the bowl, as it were. So it's those kind of things that, you can't really claim a cause and effect for, and the impact works in completely non-linear and predictable ways. But at the estate, as it evolved, certain people started to leave, more people started to come who fitted better with the future vision, and it was like it started to get into its groove of where it wanted to move towards. So you can never claim kind of that you caused that, but you do notice all sorts of synchronicities go on as the when you do this level of work. I don't know, Kalen, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, it's the concept I work with from the training in the Himalayas is known as the Genesis point. And at one point when the world was just one large continent, there was obviously information on that continent. And when it became 7 continents, I see it working like the heart, where there's something has to go back to the original source. And then if I take the United States, for example, we got divided into states, states got divided into counties, counties got divided into townships, to cities, to subdivisions, and continually there's something that connects back to the original information field. And so when I go on a property, I'm looking for that spot where the information is connected. And some might say it's the invisible realm. To me, it's visible to me because it's mathematical. So I'm trying to find that spot where I can quantify it. And the voice of the invisible realms and the voice of everything comes in at like 110 or 111 hertz. You can look that up in a browser, the 110 hertz number. And that was the voice of the teachings in the ancient languages. And this ties us back to the ancient people, where they delivered the teachings at a specific resonance that was easily understood and made accessible. And once I can find that spot on a property, I can douse the multiples of that. In the case of the lower church at the Chartres Cathedral, that number comes out at 555, which means there are 5 voices speaking from the mound beneath the cathedral. In Tikal in Guatemala, it's 880. So there are 8 voices speaking from that land. So to me, the invisible realms can be quantified, and you can find out how many voices are available to you to deliver their understanding of what has happened on a particular property or in a particular space or a particular room of a house that you're in or an office you're in. There is always a way to get back to the original information field.
This was just raising in my mind, which I think would be a concrete example of the energetic realms and how it works in the observable world, is the crop circles. You have this extraordinary phenomenon, and Peter and Kalen track this, but I think Peter, it'd be worth just to take a few minutes because everyone knows about the crop circles. And that's another kind of concrete example of how just energy condenses and crystallizes, as Kaylin was just describing, in mathematical ways. And the next thing you know, you've got a crop circle. So let's just talk about the crop circles for a few minutes. Peter, you first, and then Kaylin.
Thanks, Jim. I've actually got one of the Merry Musing sessions next year on that. So I was going to sit down and work out what my explanation was for it before that. So you've put me on the spot a bit early. But no, first of all, nobody really understands, which is one of the great, which I think is one of its teachings, right? That there are still mysteries out there, essentially, that we can't grok. What is very clear is that it's easy to tell which ones are man-made, and it's easy to tell which ones aren't. So there's no doubt that there are ones which just couldn't be made by humans because of the way the crops are bent without them being damaged, essentially. Anyway, there's a lot more to go into that. But so from what I've studied of it, and we did a whole Ubiquity program, you might remember, in the southwest of England around this, is that essentially it's some kind of interaction between heaven and earth, one might say, or between earth energies and the cosmic energies that somehow interact with each other to create this pattern. And people often, if people who have experienced them being made live, experience frequencies, sound, and will often see a kind of light as well going on. So there's some kind, it's like, you know, those experiments where you put grains of sand on top of a loudspeaker or something, and then you play a tune and the sand kind of goes into a pattern. Well, basically it's some kind of dynamic like that. But one of the most beautiful ones we experienced is after we did that workshop in Avebury, the next step was to go to Chartres. So the first week was out in Avebury, and then we went to Chartres for the Ubiquity Wisdom School event. And before we, just actually on the day that we were traveling by train from the UK to France, and we'd done various things, various interactions there as well. Kaylin was there as well. When we got there, we got a notification that there was a new crop circle, and it looked just like Chartres Cathedral. It had the pattern of the cathedral with its towers, and then over the days, bits were added to it. So a day later or something, there was like this kind of almost this Deva angelic kind of image above it, and then underneath it there were pictures of what looked like dolmens. And as you'll know, Jim, and if who've been to Chartres, the story is that under the cathedral there are actually these ancient stones there from the Druidic times. So these kind of things go on. People have, like a night before, collectively as a group, uploaded an intention for a certain form of crop circle to emerge, and the next day it's been there. You know, so it's some kind of interaction between consciousness and the earth frequencies. They seem to be attracted to places where there is certain water currents because of the magnetism that's there. So, but nobody's really explained it scientifically. I did read a good book about it recently that I'm going to process for this Merry Musing session next year. But I haven't kind of crystallized out the details of that yet.
Good. Kaylin, what's your take on the energetic qualities of the crop circles?
When we did the class in Avebury, I was working with a group of my senior students at that time, and having already worked at the Chartres Cathedral and downloaded various algorithms from there, our actual intention for the week was to generate a space of some sort where the possibility would be that the Chartres Cathedral would appear as a crop circle. That was the intention for the week. And we worked at Avebury, Glastonbury, and Stonehenge with a specific altar that was vibrating at a specific frequency. And then the algorithm that was introduced with the sound of the singing bowl was designed to open up that realm, the possibility that that could happen. My thought has always been that they come up from the earth as opposed to something from the sky that's coming down, is that it actually works like earth acupuncture. And at various places, mostly in Wiltshire in England, which tends to be where a lot of them are, the earth can form these geometric shapes at a time when the earth needs some sort of healing of some kind. It was interesting that I think it was 2 years ago when we did Astronomica, the entire focus of the presentation I gave was on dealing with spheres and the possibility that the Chart labyrinth was actually a sphere. And from the time I began working on that until the last day of the Chart class, I believe there were 19 total crop circles in France, which is a very unusual place for crop circles to appear. But if you go back to June of, that would be like 2019, you'll see this entire series of crop circles in France. And this has happened several times to us when we were at the Chart. We were always making sure that we were checking to see what new crop circles were coming up, because some of them seemed to be related to the teachings that were being delivered at Chart by all of the professors and the people that were there. So I believe that we have some tangible connection to the invisible realm just because we've honored the teachings of all the ancient traditions for the past 15 years. And we haven't chosen not to go there. And because we actually believe that it is possible, we're able to resurrect those ancient teachings.
Jim, I've just found the picture of that crop circle, actually. Can I just show that for a minute?
Please.
Okay, let's... so this is, for those who don't know it, that's Chartres Cathedral. And then there's all sorts of other stuff. And then this is the crop circle image that emerged as we were traveling from Avebury to Chartres. So that's pretty cool. You can see this great big dava on top of it that kind of came in later, and the dolmens underneath.
That's remarkable. And I put in the chat, everyone, a link to a YouTube that blew my mind when I saw it, but I think is well worth everybody looking at, because it goes to the heart of what Peter and Kaylin are talking about in terms of the energetic field. It's a YouTube made by a professor of psychology in California around a crop circle that appeared right, I think it was at the end of April, early May, while the world was still trying to figure out the gravity of the situation with the coronavirus. And a crop circle appeared, which was in the form of a coronavirus. And this guy began to study it. And he describes what he discerned in this YouTube, which I hope everybody sees. And there are three things that I want to bring out about this. One is the Earth knew we were going through the coronavirus pandemic. You know, when we talk about we are Earth, when we talk about the fact that the Earth is intelligence, when we talk about the fact that Gaia is our mother, that's just not an abstraction, a theoretical, intellectual, philosophical assertion. It's empirically real. Secondly, a human being could decipher what the Earth was trying to communicate. And that's equally important, because it's astonishing that these crop circles, as Peter and Kaylin were just pointing out, are communications. Around Chartres, we created an intention. The Earth responded. And not only did the Earth respond, but began to build something. That's what happened with the crop circle in May around the coronavirus. And as the guy began to look and study, he began to realize that the Earth, through this crop circle, was communicating where the cure was. before anybody in the scientific community was beginning to articulate what on earth we could do to cure this thing. It was expressed in a crop circle. And number 3, which I think is important for us all to take in, this means that the earth cares, that human beings can listen. And it's all happening at the energetic realm. It's all happening in our capacity, as Peter said right at the beginning, like with the spectrum of light. You're seeing us on Zoom because we humans have, our eyes can take a small fraction of the full spectrum of light. You move to the right or to the left, we don't see anything. There's other species that are to the left or the right that see things we can't see. They're seeing in like X-ray vision that we can't see. So the energetic qualities of the earth are all around us, just like the television frequencies and radio frequencies are going through our rooms all the time. But if you have the right receiver to the right frequency, you can pick up the show. So it's worth just taking in that this isn't speculative. This is intensely existential. It's purely a question of humanity's ability to understand that it's real, and then to begin to set ourselves at the frequency necessary to actually discern, understand, and communicate, knowing that we're in a caring, compassionate, loving ecosystem that is actually wanting to help us out. So before we turn to neuroscience, Peter and Kaylin, what would be your quick comments on what I've said about the crop circles and your own understanding of these matters in terms of energetics?
Yeah, well, it's, in my experience, definitely it's some kind of communication that's going on, Jim. And it's when we, as people are saying in the chat, it's really when we connect and open our hearts and learn to see in a different way that we get access to that information. And if I may, I just wanted to share a little bit how this work has impacted Ubiquity, because it has quite significantly. In fact, it was while I was doing my 4th year of the eco-intention training, you have to have a number of projects. And at that point, we were Wisdom University at the beginning, as you may remember. And so I chose to balance energetically Wisdom University. And it's a 9-month, process. And then there's kind of 3 months of stabilization afterwards. And it was in that 9-month energetic envelope that Ubiquity University was born, as well as my 3rd son actually being born, which was a surprise to us all. But so, Wisdom University in that energetic window, because we'd set goals for Wisdom University, right? We'd set intentions about what we wanted to achieve, and boom, in that period, Ubiquity University emerged. Now, in the latest energetic balancing process, the eco-intention process that we've done with Ubiquity that started back in January or February. So as you'll understand now, within that window, within that energetic envelope, Humanity Rising was born. And just as the energetic envelope closed, so just as all the energetic variables came into alignment, our next round of investment dropped in. So, these are things we can never say this caused that, but there's some very interesting, parallels between the work at the energetic level and things that manifest in the material world. And there's all sorts of, obviously stories related to that and case studies developed through eco-intention and other things. So as you say, this isn't just lots of ideas. This is very real. Needs to be held with a certain level of humility, because it's not like The Secret. It's not like, if I do it hard enough, I'll manifest a Lamborghini or something. Because it's heart-based, and that in a way is the kind of protective nature of it. It's got to go through your ability to feel compassion and love through the heart, right? Otherwise, it's far less effective. It can't just do it mentally. So anyway, yeah, absolutely. Crop circles, beautiful you know, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do another session over in the UK one year.
Beautiful. Kaylin, any comment?
I would just say the work with the organizational architecture at the university, like I do with a lot of companies, the idea is to somehow bring in energy from the invisible realm into a space and raise the vibration of the space. And when you do that, what happens sometimes are some of the employees that you've had for a long time even may decide to leave because the vibration is too high for them and they can't relate to it. But at the same time, you start attracting all of these new people who are going, wow, I just picked up a frequency of a new thing that I had never thought about before. I wonder what that's about. And they join your team. So I think it's always important to keep increasing the vibration and the connection from the invisible realm, because especially for organizations, because that's how you're going to grow. You're never going to grow just staying right where you are, because the world is continually changing and you need to be bringing in the people who can resonate with the new frequency that's birthing.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. It's such a fascinating field to be exploring today, and that's part of why we all love Ubiquity University as much as we do, everyone, because we're, you know, it's a new kind of education for a new kind of world. And in the new world, it's all about energetics and about frequencies and about the eco field and about humanity's rediscovery of the knowledge that was at the beginning, that we're one with it. And because we're one with it, we can attune ourselves, as Kaylin was just saying, to the frequency that's now emerging, that's drawing us into the future, as sort of what Barbara Marx Hubbard called Homo noeticus, a new kind of human. And that's what Ubiquity is here to help birth. And the reason why we've got people like Peter and Kaylin in the senior leadership team, and also Jim Hickman, who I'd like to introduce. Mr. Hickman and I go back a very, very long way. We've been close friends for well over 35 years, I think it is. And we've been working together very closely ever since. Jim has been on the board of several of the organizations that I put together with Mr. Gorbachev, and then Wisdom University, and then Ubiquity University. His passion is the neurosciences and how we can attune ourselves to that energetic understanding of the world. He teaches an annual course in the neurosciences at Ubiquity that is well worth taking. We'll have our next one next fall, in the fall of 2021. So Jim, welcome to Humanity Rising, and would just love to hear your views on what Peter and Kaylin have been talking about, and anything you want to say about the relevance of the neurosciences in these matters.
Great, thank you, Jim. And I wanted to just take a little bit of a related but somewhat shifting perspective on everything that Kaylin and Peter especially have been talking about, because I personally have been immersed in that world since 1969, when I did ESP telepathy experiments at the Maimonides Dream Laboratory in New York, where we were exploring ESP conducive states of consciousness. So it starts with, how does the brain heart, because it's not just about neuroscience, it's not just about the brain, it's about the brain heart relationship, but how does that function in different states of consciousness to allow us, to give us access to information that is somewhat different and expansive in relation to what we normally perceive through our five senses. And I would just say, as a brief example, because we've studied, as most of you probably know, there are four primary brainwave states for the brain. You know, beta, which is where most of us spend most of our time, because that's really where we think about things and make decisions and the cognitive part of the brain functions. And then the alpha state, which many of us are familiar with as a more relaxed and receptive state of the brain function. And then theta, which is even slower brainwave function, more creative, more receptive, and then delta, which is usually associated with sleep. And we found that the most conducive way of studying telepathy was in sleeping subjects, influencing their dreams. And so we did a variety of experiments in different parts of the world with groups of people attempting to affect the content of a sleeping subject in the Maimonides Dream Laboratory. And the one that I always remember the most, some of you may remember, there was a very popular rock and roll band called the Grateful Dead, which was associated with a variety of states of consciousness. And one of the experiments I loved the most was at a Grateful Dead concert. We took the 15,000 people in the audience who, as you can imagine, were in a variety of states of consciousness, and focused them on the sleeping subject in Brooklyn, you know, maybe 20 miles away. And the results were statistically significant. And it's an example of where I started looking at how non-ordinary states of consciousness move us into receptive states of our system that gives us access to a lot of the things that Peter and Kaylin have been talking about. And that's been my main interest. So in the neuroscience side, I teach a course I call Applied Neuroscience. How do we take what we've learned from science and apply it in our lives in a way that opens us up to these greater receptive possibilities? So I wanted to just point out a couple of key points here. We've talked about energy and energetics, and obviously that's very important. Kaylin pointed to, when we look outside and we see everything, it's not actually there. It's a bunch of energetic systems that are all coming together and manifest into certain material world in a way that our visual and auditory, et cetera, senses can see it. And that's very important because evolutionarily, we developed ourselves into the current human form so that the species would survive. And it was much more important to see and hear threats than to be in the invisible realms and imagine things. We had other people in our tribes to do that for us and give us direction, which was very important. And as Kaylin and Peter and Jim have pointed out, at a certain point, in a sense, Newtonian mechanics took over and separated us from that. And now we're at a time in our development where it's all coming back together again. Kaylin pointed to the fundamental energetic system of what's all out there is at the quantum level. And at the quantum level, we have effects that like what Kaylin referred to, the observer effect, that are probability dependent. And it seems that the effect of the quantum energy to manifest into a physical form is dependent on some sort of intelligence in the dance with the quantum energy. And so this moves us into, so what does the human do? Because we have a a vehicle, in a sense, that is our body, as Jim said, that can decipher information from the invisible realms, including other intelligences like Mother Earth, or as we say down here in the Andes, Pachamama. And we can begin to understand that from the heart-brain system as well, so that we no longer are in a time when all we want to do is focus on the sort of cognitive part of the brain and collect a bunch of data, but recognize that we have 100 billion neurons in the brain. Each one of those neurons has the capacity to connect to 5,000 other neurons, 500 trillion connections in our brain that can be affected by attention and intention, neuroplasticity. One of the things we've learned in the last 20 years, that we can use our attention, in a sense, part of our intelligence, to rewire our brains in a way that can give us access to other kinds of sensitivities and information than what we have normally developed over the last several hundred years. So, and what happens is, here's a little neuron, here's another little neuron, and they exchange chemical processes, biochemical processes, and the distance in between these two neurons is called a synapse. And what a quantum physicist at Berkeley showed me is that the molecule of the chemical transmitter that goes from one neuron to the other is larger than the receiving end of the neuron. So from a classical Newtonian point of view, it can't happen. And what Henry Stapp taught me is that it's a quantum effect. Only at the quantum level can a large molecule, in a sense, disassemble itself energetically and enter another neuron and reassemble itself into that molecule. So think about 500 trillion connections in your brain are wiring themselves with a quantum effect. And that quantum effect is dependent upon our attention and our intention. And so here we get to, how do we use our brain-heart system and our imagination and our intelligence and perhaps other states of awareness to affect the internal receptive system of our body, our vehicle here, to give us access to these areas of information, invisible realms, Kaylin, Peter, Jim, and others referred to, that interpenetrate us and that are available to our, in a sense, quantum stimulated receptive process that connects our heart, our brain, our gut, etc. And, you know, there's a bunch of different research studies that show something about it. But one of the last point I want to make is that 2 points. One, the brain does not distinguish between an imaginary idea and a real idea. The real event and the imagination that helps precede that event, the brain doesn't know the difference to. So a part of the practice is really harnessing that imagination in a way that it can affect quantum processes in the probability aspect of the world that bring into manifestation the kinds of beings and doings that we're all interested in pursuing. And the second thing is that in all of this research, where we've gone from figuring out that there are electrons that circulate the nucleus of an atom, down to beginning to sense a quantum process, no one can say anything about intelligence. There is an underlying, and in a sense, the mystical versus the normal, there's an underlying intelligence to all of this that has yet to be actually defined from the scientific point of view, but clearly interpenetrates all of what we're doing and is at the heart of, in a sense, what we call on to do the kinds of sensing that Kaylin and Peter and Jim have talked about. And for me, the primary practice is that within me is a connection to a larger intelligence that has a sense of what it is that wants to happen. And so in my work with Jim Garrison over the years in the Soviet Union and in other aspects of Ubiquity, I have a practice in which what I call the right ratio between surrendering into the fundamental beingness of who we are, and action. We take action out of that more fundamental knowing about the best and right action to take, similar to what Peter was just describing, that there's something larger emerging, that if we tune into it at a deep level of what our capacity really is, we can be led into creating a world that is more supportive, efficient, effective for all living things. And that's a part of what we practice in the applied neuroscience class, and that I've learned a lot from Will Tagle and Nicola Fields and Peter and Kaylin in the energetic realms. But I just want to emphasize that science and the mystical realms are no longer separated like black and white. The line has become blurred. And so the more we can integrate into our normal limiting belief system that says, yeah, but what's the science? It's all, airy-fairy stuff. The more we can integrate that, no, we've begun to cross that line and see where the blurring is between the mystical and the magical and the manifested reality that we all live in. And so that's part of what Ubiquity does too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I think it might be worth, just because we're talking about this energetic interconnectivity, to talk a little bit about, what the physicists are talking about in terms of entanglement, that the experiments they've done when they split the protons, and they're like 10, 14 miles apart, and you take one of the protons and make them do something instantaneously, the other part of the proton, miles and miles away, has instantaneously the same reaction, which was a revolutionary discovery on the part of the physicists, but absolutely essential to the point that you and Peter and Kaylin are making today about our interconnectivity. So just from a neuroscience point of view, speak just for a moment about entanglement and the interconnection between us and the larger eco field.
Well, I think you've summarized it. Kaylin pointed to it also when he talked about, non-locality. It's all the same. Action at a distance, non-locality, quantum entanglement. And you've summarized it well. At a very fundamental level of matter, and this is what we have to remember, just as when we look out the window, that's not what's real at the fundamental level of matter. It is made up of these infinitesimally small energetic particles that are connected to one another in a way that, as Jim described, once two of them are connected, you can separate them not just by miles, but according to whatever we've been able to do, as far as you can imagine. And when you interact with one of those, instantaneously, there's an action on the part of the other one that was entangled, indicating that obviously there's some kind of non-locality. It's not about, wow, he can do that 15 miles away. It's more like there isn't distance separation in this sort of world. And it's sort of like, you know, what Einstein used to say, reality is just an illusion. It's a very compelling illusion, but it's still an illusion because time does not exist. We've created it, and it's related to our perceptions. And so when we get into this non-locality, it moves us deep into what Peter and Kaylin have been talking about our capacity to be with information, energetic capacities that can sense everything from extraterrestrial activity, if and when that begins to occur, and what's happening inside the earth and within the earth, and then obviously these various unusual formations that we come across, crop circles, etc., that indicate something much more definitive within our beingness and doingness in the material and and invisible realm worlds is interconnected in a substantial way. I don't know. Did that help, Jim?
Yeah. I mean, because if you
how can you talk about these things? I mean, how can
you think that a proton split will vibrate together no matter what the difference? That means that anything that was originally connected, if you pull it apart, it's still one. So if you think of the Big Bang,
at a very fundamental energetic level,
the whole universe was one infinitely dense little speck, and we went boom. It's all still one.
And it's related. One. Some of us on this call might have had experiences with men or women who are able to read your life form, a psychic of some sort. And one of the comments that was made to me once by one of these women was that we have the capacity to sense the birth of the universe because all the particles carry the information from that time 16 billion years ago, and we can access the information of those particles, and they're all connected to all the rest of them. It's, you know, it's kind of a lot of data, a little more than our computers can handle. But,
yeah, we've got 500
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And of course, one last thing about intelligence, because I think it's interesting in terms of where we are with media, et cetera. You know, we are on the verge of creating semi-intelligent, independent machines, robots, et cetera. I mean, we can with a drone, you know, without human interaction, identify a target and destroy the target in a battlefield, because the drone has all the capacities to make the decision. In a sense, semi-intelligence, artificial intelligence. And of course, the question that people wrestle with, when will it begin to make decisions that it wasn't programmed to do? In effect, create a larger intelligence than came out of all of the little devices we put in to accept our programs. And that's, you know, an interesting question. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me bring Peter and Kaylin back in, but I want to insert a comment that Stan Pokris just put in the chat a few minutes ago, which I think is well worth just all of us contemplating for a moment. He says, I believe that curiosity is the prime cause of consciousness, and that everything else in our universe and everything else in our universe, all God needed to create was curiosity itself. Then everything else will manifest. Peter, Kaylin, Jim, where does curiosity come in these realms of energetics, magic, interconnectivity, and entanglement?
Well, if we work with the premise that curiosity is a morphogenic field in and of itself, one thing I've worked with over the past few years is the extended reticular thalamic activating system, which is a part of the brain that when you have an experience, it decides whether you're building on a previous memory or this is a new memory that you need to add to the database. So when I look at the current part of the discussion, what we're actually dealing with is our relationship with a morphogenic field of information that is already there. So that's it. When I'm quantifying it, I'm quantifying that which appears in the morphogenic field that we haven't brought into our own essence yet. I'm quantifying that as something that appears in a Lorentzian manifold, and I quantify it in Lucas numbers in what's known as Minkowski space-time, which is a totally different time, which allows you to move back and forth across the spectrum from the past to the future. We gave a presentation of the labyrinth on that, that's actually what a labyrinth is. And if we're working in Newtonian time in a Riemannian manifold as quantifiable, we don't open ourselves up to this new information being accessible in the morphogenic field. All of that information is there. You could call a morphogenic field an invisible realm. But, you know, the fact that a flock of birds can turn simultaneously and nobody runs into each other, it's obvious that we're sitting in a field of information that is entangled, which is why I did the part of the dissertation was on quantum non-locality, the fact that it's all the same. And from a Buddhist perspective, if you accept that all is emptiness, then everything has to be connected because it's all empty. So therefore, inherently, everything is connected because it's all emptiness. And it's much easier to work with the concepts of quantum non-locality and morphogenic fields if you're willing to accept the fact that it's all empty. So therefore, it has to be related as a prima facie case.
Julianne Jones just made a good point that curiosity is the synapse of life, connecting the visible and the invisible dots. I love this. Peter, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. I just love the way the science is connecting to the kind of these mystical wisdom traditions now, as it were. And curiosity, you know, when there's two kind of ways to work with information, as it were. One is receptive and the other is active, right? And the receptive is when you're picking up information. And curiosity is the key condition for effectively reading information, as it were, that's coming in, because it's about openness. There's a slight lightness to it. You know, if you try to concentrate really hard, you find yourself contract, frowning and contracting, and then you're not open to receiving the information. So the curiosity is like where you're not attached to any particular outcome. You're just really present with what it is that wants to come in, and that's the best conditions for being able to do a reading, let's say, of information or anything. At the same time, there is the ability to be active, so to actually co-create with and interact with the information fields. And the key when doing that is, you upload the intention, but then you let it go, and you feel gratitude for the fact that it's already that way. So there's got to be an emotional connection to it. And then you go back to being curious about how it's going to manifest, because life will kind of organize itself to help manifest that intention if the conditions are right. And what you need to be doing is paying attention to how life does that. So what's it going to present to you to help you manifest that intention, something that you maybe could never have thought of. And if you're not present and being curious because you're thinking it's going to be something else, then you miss it. And it's like a train coming onto the platform. You know, if you're kind of stuck in your iPhone when the train comes in and leaves, you know, then you've missed the train. So being curious and present is about being there when the train arrives at the platform, so you can get on, essentially, the Cosmic Express. And so those, you know, this is very closely related to the conversation we had with Brenda Dunn, you may remember, on Humanity Rising, who did the 28 years of research at Princeton that proved beyond statistical doubt that human intention affects otherwise random events outside of space and time. So people could be the other side of the planet and they would be influencing the machines at exactly the same time. They even showed how people in the inverted commas future could influence something that happened in the past. And just quickly, the experiment was they recorded a tape that had equal amounts of horrible white noise on it and then beautiful classical music, equal amounts in kind of bits. And they gave them to people, told them to go away and listen to them and try to wish for and intend more classical music than horrible white noise. The original tape they locked in a safe. So people went away and did that. They sent their tapes back. They went to the safe, pulled the tape out, and the amount of classical music on the tapes had increased. So that completely blows our mind in terms of thinking linearly about things. So when we move into those domains, time, like Jim Hickman said, linear time is something that we created through our perception as we emerged out of being hunter-gatherers. For 3 million years, right, we were hunter-gatherers and we didn't experience time linearly. We experienced it cyclically and rhythmically. And now what we're doing is kind of going translinear in our awareness. So we're integrating the chronological linearity of time and a non-linear awareness of that and interaction with that. So that's how I make sense of it. But we could be spending a lot more time on this, but I just love the way the science is catching up with the wisdom. You know?
They're saying, Mr. Hickman, what would you say about curiosity in these matters?
Oh, curiosity. I don't know. I always look at my cat when I think about curiosity. And he certainly learns an awful lot of stuff, but it also kills the cat. So there's a challenge, I guess. I don't know that much about the mechanisms of curiosity. I like the idea. It's obviously an essential element to going back to the evolution of our species, to the survival of the species. And that's a part of why we've survived, and we were given this as a capacity in our brain. And we're always looking for something new, and that allows us to expand into something new, in a sense. I was gonna say one other thing, picking up on what Peter said, because it's relevant to what he was saying. One of the more interesting experiments I was involved in with psychic phenomena in the early days was the effect of meditators. And this is relevant to the state of consciousness within which things can occur, perhaps. But the effect of meditators on a random number generator powered by radioactive decay. Now, the decay of a radioactive particle from a radioactive source is among, if not the most random event in nature. And so the experiment was, I did this with Michael Murphy. We took a device that was a random number generator generated by the random decay of of radioactive particles, put it under Michael's chair, where he meditated for an hour or two every morning. And after about 10 days, there was order in the randomness. The act of, in a sense, surrendering into a greater degree of order rather than chaos, etc., affected at a distance the chaotic, the random event of nature. And so back to what Peter was saying, you know, these sorts of things point us to, and then we go back to curiosity, point us to states of awareness, curious states, for example, that move us into bigger parts of ourselves that can, in effect, have major impact on the physical world as we experience it, and hopefully contribute to creating a different world that we're moving into post-pandemically.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we're drawing to the end of our time, so I'm just going to ask each of you to make some closing comments. And I think the question to each of you is, given what you know about the energetic realm, about neuroscience, the interconnectivity of all being, what action item, what is one thing that you would offer out for all of us to consider doing or thinking about? Is there a quality that is necessary to really enter into the energetic realm? So why don't we do it? Why don't we do first you, Kaylin, and then Jim, and then Peter, you can have the final statement. Kaylin.
I guess in my work, I assume that everything is connected. So if I'm in a property or a church or somewhere, and I can find my genesis point so that I can hear the voice, I know after 30 years that there is some place where you can speak to the land, or you can speak to a structure of some kind. There's a place in there where it accesses information. And I think people need to be open. They need to be open to experiencing that. And invariably, when I work with someone, and I remember when I was working on the Rothko Chapel in Houston, and I walked in and I said, "This is the Genesis point." And the person that was working that day said, "That's weird, because that's where the people go. When they're in the chapel, they tend to stand there to experience the chapel." And that happens in cathedrals, any number of places, is that people are drawn to that spot because they crave information. And that could be part of the curiosity, but people want to experience something in a different way than just as a tourist. And that applies to life itself. So you just have to be willing to know that the invisible realm, or whatever you're curious about, also wants to have a discussion with you, because it's more meaningful to a tree or a rock or whatever to have a discussion with you. So just be open to it, which is when I started out, I said, everybody has the keys. You just have to be willing to accept the belief that your key will work. So don't think that you can't do it, because you can. You just have to go there. And once you go there once, you won't go back.
Beautifully put, Kaylin. Thank you. Thank you. Jim.
Well, picking up on Kaylin's essential point, everything is connected. I think a primary practice is to remember that at all times, because our world is designed so we forget it, and the more we can remind ourselves. So it brings up compassion for the other. When, in relationship, it's a hard time, etc. Everything is connected. Oh, so we feel compassion for ourselves, to include both of us, or appreciation of differences. Everything is connected. And when this person is doing something that, looks like it ought to not be done, that's different from the way I think life should be, appreciate that that's a part of the immersion of the connectedness among us all, that there are different expressions of ourselves, in a sense. And then, so for me, it's about learning and adopting some basic practices in life. And there are lots of them. There are all kinds of courses out there that teach you to do this or that. I mean, gratitude is one that has become really important. And the research shows that, and that it reminds us how connected we are with everything and everyone. The more we are grateful for the small and large things that interpenetrate our lives. And then for me, it's just taking a little bit of time whenever you remember to soften a minute and deepen into a state that Kaylin describes, that allows that connection to express itself through you. And, you know, waiting in a line at the bank, if we ever get back to having a line at the bank, when, you know, there's somebody's doing something, et cetera, it's just breathe a little and surrender into that concept, that experience that everything is connected. It's an important koan, mantra, etc., to carry with us in every moment.
Thank you, Jim. And Peter, as you make your final comment, I think it would be good to mention some of the courses again that we're offering through Ubiquity, if anyone's interested in just sort of a deeper dive into energetics. Kaylin teaches an Energetics of Art course, which is a beautiful course. Peter, you've taught some things. You might want to refer to what we're building with Hans, and just include that. And then, you know, let's talk a moment about your book, because that's very important for people. That's brand new on the market, and it's really about this whole domain. So, Peter.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so your your question was, what can people do? And I've been pondering this a lot, and the quote that I think kind of grabs it best for me is Ken Wilber's quote in Up from Eden, where he says, "When the great mother is repressed, the great goddess is concealed." And for me, what he's referring to there is the great goddess is the subtle energetic information realm. And what he's saying is, when we've repressed our relationship to the earth, the great mother, so when we've split ourselves off, and I believe humanity has a massive trauma, because instead of transcending and including that kind of 3 million years experience of instinctive interconnectedness, not cognitive thinking about it, but instinctive interconnectedness, when our sense of separate self emerged, in the West anyway, transcending and repressing that. That's what's kind of created the unrootedness and the chaos of everything that we're doing. And when we do soften, like Jim Hickman described, which I think is a great way of putting it, there's often a lot of pain there, because we start to feel the trauma of that split. We start to feel the pain of having forgotten that we are the earth, you know, this mother that gave birth to us. And so it's, in my experience, it's really important that as we attempt to stretch up, as it were, to engage these realms, we sink the roots deeper into that kind of precognitive experience of who we are, and heal that split, because that gives us the holding to be able to work consciously and effectively with the translinear dimensions of interconnectedness, as it were. So it's it's going both ways, really, making sure that we slow, reconnect, deal with any kind of pain that we're feeling of the split, as I would describe it as the pain and the promise. We need to heal the pain to access the promise, essentially. And then find whatever practice it is that works for you, you know, whether it's working with intention, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, whether it's geomancy, work with the land more, or whatever it is that helps you to develop that muscle and remember that part of ourselves that can help us gain access. And slowing down and stopping and quieting the rational mind is a major precondition of that, being able to do that. So, yeah. So on the the exciting thing, you know, I've written a couple of books before, and they've been fairly from the rational mind. And when I was writing this, I knew it couldn't be just rational, these 12, because we have to work in this realm from another aspect, which is why I commissioned 12 pieces of art to go with each of these principles, so that we didn't just read the words and try to grok them cognitively, but we could actually resonate with our whole being with each of these principles. And Tyra, who created the art, is someone who's able to kind of feel the essence of the principle and then kind of download an image and then work with it creatively to give us something that really does enable us to resonate with it. So I'm really excited about the fact that it's, you know, it's got the art in it, and it's just beautiful art as well. Yeah, on the courses, I think you've mentioned most of them. You know, we've got the Introduction to Energetics, which is a great micro course that gives people an introduction to some of these different practices and the basic concepts. Anybody can take that at any time. Sometimes we do a live version as well. Then there's Kaelin's Introduction, Energetics of Art, which is beautiful and gets into that dimension through the creative expression. And Jim's Neuroscience course, of course, somebody asked about that and I couldn't find it on our website right now. So maybe it's not, maybe there's one that's not being is not in the pipeline quite yet, but keep an eye on it. And I'm sure that will come up again because he does it occasionally. And then in the Merry Musings series, I touch on a number of different kind of energetics themes there. That's like a call a month, as it were, where we dive into different topics. But just generally, I would say, you know, if our whole wisdom school at Ubiquity is grounded in this. So a PhD or a master's from Ubiquity's wisdom school has at its foundation this perspective and this energetic dimension in all elements. And it's just amazing the work the students do, the dissertations that come out of it. I mean, as a PhD advisor, sometimes you read these pieces and it's such, people have been talking about the joy of in the chat of this be making all of this explicit, you know, to see people actually create rigorous academic dissertations and pieces of work that are really grounded and integrate this aspect of our reality is so exciting in terms of, you know, the possibilities that this gives us for our future. So very grateful for the fact that, you know, synchronistically this day dropped out of the Humanity Rising calendar. And then all of a sudden, boop, 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 came together. And here we are having this session, which is great. So thanks for hosting us, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Kaelin. Thank you, Jim. It's a beautiful thing to be able to express really the ethos and essence of Ubiquity University. And I was very intrigued with a comment that Shannon MacArthur just put in the chat. We are being stretched into being rather than squeezed into this world. And I think, Shannon, you called it. I mean, think about this, everyone. The pandemic is just squeezing us into isolation, into lockdown, into social distancing. And we got to have masks on. We can't touch. We're being squeezed. And right at the moment we're being squeezed, we need to stretch into being. And this session has stretched us and it's been beautiful. And I just want to thank all of you and welcome everybody to the after session chat group, which, as you all know, is very informal and exciting. The link is in the chat box. And just contemplate this, everyone, just this, how can you, having heard what you've heard and having known what you know, how do we take this as an occasion to stretch ourselves into being? We know we can. We know we should. Allow this to inspire us to take that next stretch. And then tomorrow, we're going to delve back into the mundane reality of climate change. And we have Professor Robert Reese, who's a professor at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, major professor who's taught in major universities around the world. He's convening some spokespeople from the major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism, to talk about the religions and what they're doing and what they should be doing in reference to climate change. And this will be the first of a series of sessions that Bob has been planning, that he and I have been talking about. So that's going to be very exciting tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European Time, as always, on Humanity Rising. So thank you, everyone. See you in the after session. And Peter, Jim, Kaylin, well done. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Rick, are you on?